Hey, welcome to Hot Takes. I'm your host, James Scott, here to analyze anything and everything interesting. Let's dig into today's topics.
James, I feel like we produce a million episodes a month because I feel like it was just yesterday we sat down recording and just making another episode. And I'm not complaining. This is great. You're pushing content out. You are ready all the time, and
I love it, man. I love it.
you can honestly tell because you're always ready to produce this content. But
I'll tell you, once we get a certain number of people on here, I want to go live a lot more often than
mhm.
our 2 times a month. But definitely when we are going live, check that out. We absolutely have a great time on there, don't we, Chris?
We do. We really do. It's a bundle of fun. And I'm not saying that sarcastically. I know I always sound sarcastic sometimes, but it actually is fun. I actually had a lot of fun on our last live stream. So for everyone that's listening, you just really be sure to check that out because we're laughing, we're talking with the audience when they drop by. You could even say hey if you want. You don't even need to interact with what's going on. You don't For now, you don't have to be like a big participant in what the subject is. Just drop by, say hey, laugh. But
It's interesting. I was on Robbie Hyde's live stream the
mhm,
other night.
you were
Definitely
telling me.
check out his content. He's one of the best content creators out there. He's got one of the better baseball minds out there. He could work in a front office if he wanted to. I don't know if that's something he wants to do. I think he'll make a living through his channel. It's a fantastic channel. Definitely check it out. This is a Yankee fan giving a Boston Red Sox fan reps. Yeah, definitely check him out. He's great. But I was on his channel and he does live streams a lot. And, he was talking with, everybody. And, I put in a comment there and lo and behold, we had my buddy Travis come into our live stream the other day and he's there in Robbie's stream with me. And I'm like, oh man, this
Mhm.
is great. This is great. So now we have a little bit of, cross viewership starting. Oh man, I'll tell you, Robbie's got great viewership. Travis knows this, okay? Like it's a great group of guys. And I'm hoping if we could get Robbie on here like as a guest in the future, that would be the coolest thing. I think that would be really really neat.
Mhm.
But we have actually a little bit of news today, don't we,
You
Chris?
do because I've been hearing some things about Otani
Uh-huh.
this week. So why don't you just start rolling?
So, okay, here's where things get really interesting. So, Ohtani has been a guy who people have been talking about as this kind of phenom, this enigma for a few years now. He's played, but then he's gotten hurt, and then there was a shortened year. A lot of different things kind of happened, and he was transitioning. Coming over from Japan and getting used to the major leagues. Now, Ohtani is a 6 foot, about four pitcher and left-handed hitter, left-handed pitcher, left-handed hitter. Um, he he's on the same team as Trout. He's on the same team as Upton, who was in the big leagues at age 19 and has been a stud ever since. He's on the same team as when Simmons was there last year. So, and the same team as currently Rendon. He's on the same team as Pujols. Okay, and there are people on that team who have said that even with Trout on the team, that they've never seen a talent like Otani's. And these are the reasons. I watched him in spring training in person, and he hit a ball over the batter's eye that I like. It went out of sight, and it ended up. They said it went about 465 feet, which is far. It honestly, it looked a lot farther than that to me. Um, it looked like it was going up as it went over the batter's eye, or at least it had just started to sink right as it started to go over the batter's eye. But this is a guy who's capable of hitting the ball as far as I've ever seen any lefty hit it in person. And the other day in the first inning, he hit a ball 115 miles an hour for a hit, and a little bit more than 115 point something. And that was the hardest hit of the entire season. That's no one had hit a ball and got a hit for it, a successful hit for it. That was that hard hit.
Mhm.
And he was pitching that day too. And he threw a ball, I believe, slightly over 102 miles an hour, so 102 point something. And that was the hardest thrown pitch by any pitcher at that point in the season. And he did both within the first inning. This is a talent that, if he could stay healthy, he could do some pretty extraordinary things, pretty big things, because it's not just like he can hit the ball that far when he's at the plate. It's that he has a good enough hit tool to do it with consistency. And he's doing both those things as a left-handed pitcher and a left-handed hitter, meaning as a lefty hitter, you're facing mainly righties. You're going to have the platoon advantage. You're going to do better versus the righties massively, especially with a guy like him with his kind of bat speed, than you're going to do against lefties. That lefties are a little bit on you quicker. Although he's got the kind of bat speed where he'll figure out lefties. But off the mound from the left side, you never see lefties throw that hard. And the ones that do are relievers, Garrett Crochet or Aroldis Chapman. He's a starter throwing that hard. So it's incredible seeing him do these things. And then in addition to that, if you're looking at his sprint speed's like in the 98th percentile. So he's a fantastic base runner, incredibly fast base runner as well.
Mhm.
I'm not trying to push anything, but I do think it's very possible that if you got him, a glove and you put him at first, or you got him a glove and you put him in center, that he could probably field pretty decently too with
Mhm.
his skills. He's 6'4" with those huge arms, that the wingspan, if you will, works perfectly at first. And then, of course, his speed and arm work great in center. He just has to play back. So, yeah, what can't he do? Is I think what we were talking about like earlier. What can't Ohtani do is really more of the question. And he's batting like right back to back with Trout. It's beautiful. I mean, that's lefty righty. He's the lefty, Trout's the righty. I mean, that's just beyond exciting if I'm a baseball fan, and I can't imagine what Angels fans feel like, especially given how good of a year they should have this year. So, without further ado, we actually got to talk about a team that's in the Angels division. We're doing divisional breakdowns again today. So the way we do it, and we'll talk about this. We've talked about this on previous videos, but we'll touch on it right here again. Is we go division by division, um, bottom to top, and we'll discuss the worst team in each division, and we'll do the National League and the American League. We'll do both. So it won't be, an episode where we discuss two American League teams. It'll be the worst in the East in the National League, and the worst in the East in the American League, or the fourth place team in the West and of the National League, and the fourth place team in the West of the American League. And that's how we do this series. So let's start off with the AL West, the fourth place team in the Angels division. We are projecting it to be the Seattle Mariners. The Mariners, it's not that they have a bad team. It's not that they have a bad system. They have probably one of my favorite farm systems, if not my favorite farm system in baseball.
You're so good at like letting people off soft. They're it's not that they're a bad team,
Well, they're
but
they're building. Like, this is one of those teams where, like, in like 1 year, with maybe 3 signings max. Like, yeah,
Mm,
but I mean, you could do more than those, but I think you could keep it to about 3 and make it by you could take this team from where they are with the division that they have and literally be, number one, number two in the division. So that's why I'm kind of like letting Mariners fans know that, like, yo, like don't be too upset that this is probably a fourth place team, maybe a third place team.
In
Because
the
this is a
future, it'll be a
team
second
or first.
yeah.
Exactly. Now there are reasons why I say it's a little bit more likely that they're a second place team in the near future.
Hmm.
But if they build on that, by 2023, they could be the number one clear team. But they'd be able to compete for it is the point that I'm trying to make here. So, um, you know, be excited, watch this team develop, and that's the cool thing. This is a development year. This is a year where at the big league level, there are going to be guys coming in all year that are trying to prove themselves, that are going to be big pieces that should be part of the next championship team. So be excited, Mariners fans. Um, so let's start off with the pitching staff, okay? Now I have their roster here as reference if I need to use it, but they have Yusei Kikuchi, who ERA wise was not too good last year, but his strikeouts, his lack of walks, and his ground ball percentage were all good. And when you have all three of those working for you, you should perform pretty well. And he's a guy who, he's a left-hander, and he's been in the league not particularly long. I think that this year, he could be a number 3 starter, maybe a number 2 starter, depending on how things go for him. But I think that's a big piece for them moving forward. They have Justice Sheffield, who was brought over from the Yankees system. As anyone who's been watching us do this, they know I'm a Yankee fan. When Justice Sheffield was in the Yankees system, I was a huge fan of him. I viewed him as a guy who at very worst would be a 3 starter, but when he develops and at his peak, he could probably be closer to a 1. I know a lot of people don't agree with me there, but I very much see him as a weak contact pitcher. And he'll execute his pitches in a certain way so that he can get to that weak contact. And he also throws pretty decently hard for a lefty starter. Now, again, that kind of puts in perspective how good Ohtani is, because you have Justice Sheffield throwing like 97 as a lefty with the fastball at, semi-regularly 96, 97, right? It's hard for a lefty. Then you have Ohtani over here. It's the beginning of the season, and he's already throwing like 102. That's incredible. It's incredible,
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. But no, Yusei Kikuchi is he's a very legitimate starter, and I think he's going to be a fine piece for them moving forward. And I also think that Justice Sheffield is going to be a very similar starter. I think they're both lefties. They're both guys who are going to strike out a fair number of batters, and they're both going to get a lot of weak contact. I do think it might take a little bit of time for Sheffield to lower the walk rate, but that shouldn't prevent him from being effective. That should just means he should have to learn how to work out of jams a little bit better, which might actually end up increasing his ground ball percentage, end up increasing his weak contact. It should, in theory. I mean, he's young enough where he should work through all those types of things and be effective for years on end. And then here's the cool thing for the Mariners. The Mariners pulled a Cashman on Cashman. What Cashman loves to do is he loves to trade somebody to you, get prospects, and then when that guy hits free agency, he'll sign him back and it'll be like he didn't do anything. It just prospects appeared. Well, what ended up happening here was Cashman dealt Justice Sheffield to the Mariners, and the Mariners dealt to the Yankees James Paxton. Well, Paxton hit the free agent market this offseason, and the Mariners brought him back. So now you have 3 starters who are really good. And the reason why I really like Paxton, he's actually on my fantasy team. That's how much I like him. If you look at his numbers, he was hurt last year, 2020. In 2019, there was the juiced ball, and he's a lefty, okay, in a league of righties. So, of course, he didn't do as good, but he still did really, really good. And then you have the year before, he was like a 3.3 FIP or 3.3 ERA guy, one or the other, I forget which one. And then basically the same thing the year before and the year before that. So there's no real reason to think that Paxton isn't the same guy as he was when he was a Mariner. I think that that's like pretty clear that he should be the same guy. I mean, we've also seen him try out in spring training before he signed, or actually no, right before spring training rather. And it wasn't that the fastball was entirely back, but for that point in the year, it was back enough to think that he's going to be on track. He's basically, I don't know, I think he's about 90% right now, but he should be fine by midseason. And he's also, once again, a lefty that throws pretty hard, but again, doesn't throw 100 miles an hour. I don't even think he throws. Does Paxton throw 99? I think he can touch 99. So, but that he's one of the harder throwing lefties in the major leagues. So, and then of course they got Marco Gonzalez, the veteran, if you will, of the team. Very interesting, the information that came out on Gonzalez, but he's a leader. Very clearly, he's a leader. And then that's the other thing. He's a weak contact specialist as well. So now you have 4 starters. And then I know a few people, specifically one person, I consider him a pretty decent pitching expert, who's really big on Justin Dunn as a starter as well. So the Mariners do have a collection of decent starters. That's like 5 guys right there, right? And if you go in their bullpen, they got Rafael Montero, who's a former top prospect, and he's pretty good. I think the bullpen's probably his best spot. And I do think it's possible that Justin Dunn gets moved to the bullpen when one of their top pitching prospects does come up to the big leagues. And they do also have Ken Giles, but he's not going to be back for a bit. I believe he's got Tommy John. So that should help their bullpen in time. Those are 3 guys right there.
Does everyone have Tommy John?
That's kind of the thing these days. Yeah. Elbow surgery. Every pitcher gets it at least once in their career. Like that's what it feels like almost.
Mm-hmm.
But when a pitcher gets it, because of how the success rate is, I don't really worry as much, but the one to worry about is labrum. If it's shoulder labrum surgery, that's a career ender. Some people can survive it, but you have to already have a fastball that's like 100 miles an hour. Like Michael Pineda, he's a pretty good pitcher now, right? And it took him years to recover from it, because I believe he got it. I think he got the surgery in about 2010, 2011, something like that. And his fastball went from like 100, 101 down to like 93, 94. So he had to learn how to exist at a lower velocity. But that one will kill you. And even if you're a hitter, it robs power for up to 2 years. What robs contact is wrist injuries, which is why when I was looking at Andahar, I was particularly worried because he had the shoulder surgery, the labrum surgery on his power shoulder, his right shoulder. And then he had the wrist issue as well. And so now he has the power taken from him and the contact taken from him. Doesn't have defense. He doesn't particularly have a position. I mean, if you're a team looking to buy low, I guess go get him, right? But I mean, that's rough. When all your skills have been knocked out, basically, at least in the short term, not cool. The Mariners, to get back to the Mariners, their catcher situation, I don't like Tom Murphy. I'll just be honest. Some people do. Hits the ball hard. I don't like his approach. I don't like his type of player. It doesn't really work. Like, here's the deal. I like aggressive players, but not at the cost of this much contact. and not when you're giving up the ability to hit non-fastball pitches. Um, if you're aggressive, you should be being aggressive so that you can hit all different types of pitches across all zones and decrease your strikeout percentage. If you're being that aggressive, your strikeout percentage is that high, then the level of power that you're hitting for needs to be very clearly not from physicality, but from connectivity, if that makes sense. It needs to be more kinesthetic. So that's why I'm not that big on Murphy, but I think he's kind of a guy who has come up from the minor leagues and with his type of approach did really well. And now the league knows what to do. Just feed him breaking balls, or change ups, depending on which he's more susceptible to. He's going to be more susceptible to one of those. And then, of course, expand the zone on the lower outside corner. That always works, at least with his type. But they do have Luis Torrens, another guy who came from the Yankee system originally. He was taken in the Rule 5 draft by, I believe, the Padres. And I think they traded for him to get him. He's interesting. I've always liked his motions at catcher. He's not ridiculously built. And he was kind of rushed, but he can hit a little bit. And I'm kind of intrigued to see what he could be. Like maybe he could have like a Jonathan Lucroy career once the bat comes around. Not a lot of power, but enough contact and enough of an eye where about a league average hitter, maybe 5% above league average. And if the defense holds up, that's, like I said, a Lucroy-like player. I think that could be pretty cool. I think that would be the optimal outcome that the Mariners could get at that position for the big leagues. I'm also not a fan of J.P. Crawford. I just want to get that out of the way. He's their current shortstop. He's a guy who comes from a football family. I believe one of his family members might have been his father, was like in the NFL or something like that. And he clearly has the frame to put on muscle, but he hasn't. He's ridiculously fast. He has a good eye at the plate, but he has no power to speak of whatsoever. And his swing is kind of herky jerky, not consistent, not fluid. He could calm things down at the plate, and he could get better mechanics, and he could put on muscle for his frame. Maybe we'd be looking at something here, but he's a defense first shortstop with a decent eye for the strike zone, and that's it. Nothing else. So that's why I'm not really too big on him. Honestly, I feel like he could really do with just a couple of more seasons in the minors, double A, triple A. If he does that, he could iron out his swing mechanics. He could work on things on the day to day. He could put on muscle, and then maybe he comes up and it's a different story here, like maybe a Trevor story. No, I don't think he would be that good, but it is worth noting that they do have some other interesting infielders. Dylan Moore had an incredible year last year, and I'm not sure whether he can repeat it, whether it's one of those things where he's doing it because the league doesn't know him, or whether he's actually turned a corner. That's going to be interesting to see. There's my buddy Dave's cousin, Jose Marmolejos. That guy has a really quick swing. He's got a good contact bat. It's lefty. If he can learn to elevate the ball more and maybe slow down the swing so that if a breaking ball comes or a changeup comes, he's more ready, which is going to incorporate, he's going to have to incorporate more with his legs in order to do that. Something more with probably opening up his hip early, his front hip early. But he does have the bat speed and the contact where, in theory, if you work on different things, you can really hit. So I'm intrigued to see how he's going to do his first year, especially while the league doesn't know him and the fact that he's a lefty. Shed Long's an interesting player. I think he's another guy who could do with like a season in the minors, but he could hit. He's going to be a guy who, if he had that, or if he develops at the big league level, he should hit. Kyle Seager, Corey's older brother. He's kind of a hot and cold player, consistent defensively, decent left-handed bat. I'm curious what would happen if you put him in a platoon, you brought him in a lineup where he had lineup protection, and you possibly put him in a ballpark that was a little bit more favorable for him, or with weather that's more favorable for him. Maybe he would be a little bit better. That guy who got fired for them, Mather, I believe is how you say it, or Mather, Kevin Mather,
Yeah.
Mather. He literally tipped their hand saying that they were going to try and trade Seager. I don't think that, given what Seager's making, that's now off course. I think that there's a high likelihood, given all of the youth that they have in that infield, that they're going to try and trade Kyle Seager. A lot of people are super high on Evan White in their infield. He's a superstar defender. I'll say that. But he may have been rushed a little bit in terms of the offense. And I think that's because they gave him a massive contract extension, which is like, you don't really usually do that with guys who are not in the big leagues, not super ready for the big leagues. But that's also something that, like, they probably had a lot of confidence in him. So maybe the bat comes around early, even though he was rushed. But you are looking at a guy who's about as good of a defensive first baseman as we've seen in years. And that's super exciting because I always loved seeing like Mark Teixeira make great plays over there. And like, we haven't really seen a guy like that in a few years. We've seen decent ones. Goldschmidt's very decent, but we haven't seen a true, like, a guy who would turn wild throws into, great plays, because he would be able to stretch for him or scoop it or whatever it ends up being. Evan White is a guy like that. So I hope the bat comes around. The guy that I like the most for this season is a guy by the name of Ty France. No one talks about him because he was never a top prospect. Okay. The league doesn't know him, and he's going to do great now while the league doesn't know him. But given how he slowly improved over his minor league career, there's a high chance that he's able to continue the success to a certain degree moving forward, similar to his teammate, Mitch Haniger, who's now healthy as well. Actually, I was at a spring training game the other day, and I watched France and Seager and Haniger go back to back to back with home runs. So Haniger, I think he can still hit. He looked like he had the same exact swing, and that ball right off the bat. Goodness gracious. So I do think that the Mariners, you guys do have some hitters. And France, I think, especially this year, is going to really hit. But he's also a disciple from the Tony Gwynn school of hitting. San Diego State, he played for there. And that was while Tony Gwynn was still alive and still coaching there. And he's one of Tony Gwynn's last, great students, at least in my opinion. And that's why I say, in my opinion, he's one of his last great students, because this is a guy who, yes, the juice ball was in the league in, AAA in 2019, but he still batted like 399 or 398, almost to tip his hat to Tony Gwynn, almost batting 400 at the big league level. So do I think Ty France is Tony Gwynn? Absolutely not. Do I think Ty France is one of the best hitters in the big leagues? Absolutely not. But do I think Ty France is a middle of the order hitter for this season? Yes. And moving forward, I think he's an effective hitter, if that makes sense. So take that which way you will. He's probably a better third baseman than a second baseman, but I could see him playing more second base until Seager gets traded this season. So that's another player to watch out for if you're a Mariners fan. Jake Fraley is an interesting player. I would have him in AAA a little bit longer. I think he has a little bit to learn back down there. I'd bring him up, once he's really starting to contribute on a consistent level. The one thing I got to say about him is he's a decent defender. He's a left-handed hitter. And yes, he doesn't hit the ball extremely hard. That's why he hasn't gotten too much attention. But he's one of those guys where the angle that he hits the ball at consistently is optimal, kind of like Didi Gregorius. So he's going to hit for a lot more power than his exit velocity would naturally allow for because of the angle the ball is going to be coming off the bat at. He's going to be pulling balls, and it's going to be, at the perfect angle to get you maximum distance. So that's one thing about Fraley. He's kind of an underrated prospect for that reason. Um, a lot of people are really big on Kyle Lewis. I think he was completely rushed. That's why the strikeout rate was as high as it was. And then, of course, you also have to remember this. Last year, each month of the season, he got significantly worse. So he's a guy who I really hope learns a couple of things in the minors and then comes right up and lower strikeout rate, or you get the idea, right? The tools are there. He's been a top prospect for a while, but I do think he was rushed, and I do worry about his production this year. That's just the honest take. And then they have Taylor Trammell, who they ended up dealing for. I am a huge Taylor Trammell fan. He's changed his swing mechanics, which has seemingly allowed him to hit for a lot of power, a lot more power than he has in the past. He's an elite defender in left field. And this is a guy who's also one of the best base runners, who best combination of base runner and hitter in all the minor leagues. This is a guy who, in 2 consecutive futures games, basically stole home. He stole home in one of them, and then the other one he got called out, and it was not reviewable, but they checked the replays anyway. But, not the umpires, but the people who were watching the game, the TV commentators, or
Yeah, TV
um,
commentators.
yeah, they came on and they broke it down, and they were like, oh, wait a second, he's safe. So in big games, this guy's even capable of stealing home. He's clearly capable of stealing over 30 bases a year. So I'm a big Taylor Trammell fan. So they got him coming along this year as well. So it's a lot of young guys who are literally learning at the big league level. And I do think that there's a very high likelihood that this team could challenge for third place. But I also want to bring up that that guy Mather, or Kevin Mather, he was very clear about how they felt like they weren't really going to be contending too much this year. So they wanted to delay people's, service time clock. So for instance, Jared Kelenic. Jared Kelenic could really help this team. If they're trying to make a playoff push, Jared Kelenic could really, really help this team. But they may not bring him up because they don't view themselves as a team that could actually compete for a World Series. So, but he's another guy who's fantastic. And, this is where I get into their farm system. So they got him in a trade with the Mets. They got him when they traded Edwin Diaz and when they traded Robinson Cano to the Mets. And Kelnick is, I believe that's how you say his name, Kelnick. Now Kelnick, he's the rare lefty where he could hit for batting average. He's got very clean swing mechanics. He's got about 30 home run power, maybe 27 home run power. A lot of doubles, 40 plus doubles. And he's got the kind of speed where he could steal 20 bases a year too. So, and he's also a pretty darn good corner outfielder. I just wouldn't really use him in center. The only thing that could possibly be a bit of a concern for him is lefty on lefty. A good lefty pitcher on him as a lefty hitter, I think that could cause him to have a couple of issues. But if that's your only concern as a ball player, you're really good. And the other thing I want to mention with him is if you look at this guy's a gym rat. This guy's like a physical beast. So he looks like he should be able to sustain these abilities for a few years and maybe even make adjustments so that he can eventually hit lefties, and then he's doing everything. They have this is the thing. I think that if you're looking at guys who are at all levels of the minors, and you're projecting them based off of, I mean, this is the thing. I looked into every system. All right. I had to make my own assessments. Okay. Looked into every system, broke down every single player. Wander Franco is very clearly one of the best prospects in baseball, if not, consensus top three. But there's some guys who are at the lower levels who I am convinced are right there with him as, top prospects, because I am convinced that with those types of mechanics and those bodies, that you will put, even if you put on more weight, even if you put on more muscle, which both of them should, both of these guys I'm about to mention should, um, because of the mechanics, you're gonna be able to hit at a higher level, at an advanced level, because the mechanics are sound. It's not like the mechanics aren't there, but because they're so strong, the bat gets to the point where it would need to, for the launch angle or to spin the ball, because that happens with a lot of players, a lot of bigger players. They can get by because of how strong they are. Like Chris Bryant doesn't have great swing mechanics. JD Martinez doesn't have great swing mechanics. They're just built different. Okay. But if you do have perfect swing mechanics and you do have also the physicality, that's when you run into situations where it's like Miguel Cabrera, because he had the physicality and the swing mechanics. So that's kind of the guy that, in terms of foot movement, body comp type thing, at the plate, they compare, in my opinion, the Mariners' top prospect too. They think he's going to be that type of hitter, 300 type batting average, lots of times on base, you're not striking out too much, and tons of power. That's Julio Rodriguez. Watched him play in front of me a couple of times. He is phenomenal for a teenager. He's not a world beater defensively or on the bases, although he's good. Corner outfielder, good arm. But I'm convinced that he's going to really hit with some of the best hitters in the league. The other guy that I compare him to, in terms of this guy, he hasn't played nearly as much. And I think that once he's played, there's a chance that this guy's better than him. But now, given where, both of them are at, one has played, one hasn't played, I kind of measure them against each other. I view both him, Julio Rodriguez, and Jason Dominguez on a very similar level. Even if Dominguez is eventually going to be better base runner, better defender, also a switch hitter. Offensively, I view Julio Rodriguez so highly, and he's actually played a lot more than Dominguez. Like, Dominguez hasn't really played at all, not yet, at least. That I have to keep them on the same level, even though Dominguez is like, I've never seen anything like Dominguez. Well, no, that is not true. I had the opportunity to scout Trout. Last time I've seen anything like Dominguez was Mike Trout. So, yeah. But yeah, so they have goodness.
You're right.
Yeah, that's like something just got in there like a frog, But yeah, no, the Mariners have one of the best systems in all the minor leagues, and I think we got to talk a little bit about the side pieces in their system, because they do have a collection of guys that aren't the premier prospects that I just mentioned, like Kelnick or Julio or any of the guys that they just promoted. Like Taylor Trammell technically still counts as a prospect for them. A lot of people that I know are pretty big on Cal Raleigh or Raleigh, or I think it's Raleigh, he's a catcher, pretty decent, very polished. I don't know how he'll do. I'm kind of waiting to see with him. I'm personally pretty big on Noelvi Marte, I think how you say his name. He's a shortstop prospect. He's still a teenager. He's still like 19 years old. Swing mechanics are beautiful. I'm not sure he's a shortstop. He seems to be more of a second baseman or more of a third baseman. It depends on how his body develops. He's 6'1". He's about 181 pounds. Um, that's decently sized. But if he puts on say 40 pounds and he's 220, he's probably a third baseman. But if he puts on 20 pounds, then he's probably a second baseman. So it's kind of complicated there. But his swing is beautiful, and I love his approach. And the numbers he's put up have been fantastic so far. So he's a guy I'm pretty big on. And then they'd have these three pitchers in their system. You got Emerson Hancock, who I believe in last year's draft was seen as the second best pitching prospect in the entire draft. And then in recent years, they've also developed George Kirby and Logan Gilbert. I don't know as much about either of their backgrounds. They kind of came into the Mariners system during a period of time where I was solely focusing on hitters. Over the last 2 years, I've been able to focus back on pitchers, but it's more of who pitchers are rather than where they came from. But both of them are fantastic arms. I mean, Kirby 6'4" and Gilbert 6'6", and they're both considered to be clear locks for the rotation, and they should be playing in the rotation at some point this season, whereas Emerson Hancock is next season. So they have all of these prospects coming through. I mean, even that Cal Raleigh catcher, he should be in the big leagues at some point this year to give Torrens a little bit of competition. So, yeah, the Mariners have a great group of talent, and I do think that they're going to be one of the more dangerous teams in the currently very weak American League within the next couple of years. So that's to get them out of the way. Now let's move over to the National League, because the National League fourth place team is a little bit more tricky because National League, I mean, I think personally it's pretty clear who the worst team in the National League West is. National League West is it's a very interesting division because the top two are very clear. The bottom one is very clear, but 3 and 4 is where it gets a little bit dicey. Okay, so currently right now I have at 4 the San Francisco Giants, and large part this is because I don't really have very much confidence in their pitching. Gaussman, I hope he holds up, but he seems more of a 2-pitch starter, which could be an elite reliever. Johnny Cueto is, I mean, I think he should probably move to the bullpen. He's very old. He doesn't look like he's super effective as a starter. He's just kind of in there. It's kind of my same idea that I had for King Felix Hernandez. That if you put either Cueto or Felix Hernandez in the bullpen, you can revive the end of their career and make them elite relievers for like however many years either of them want to play. So that instead of, okay, now they're a bad starter for the rest of their career, they now have great ends of their careers. I mean, this used to exist with a guy like, I don't know, John Smoltz. Why can't we bring it back? I don't know. So, yeah, I think of Cueto much more as a reliever. Desclafani doesn't really do much for me. Tyler Beede is, I think, hurt right now. I do like that they brought in Jake McGee. He's their closer now. I think that big ballpark's really going to help them, and I think the fact that he's still in the same division that he was last year is also going to really help him. I think he needs that kind of jump off point because he has not been able to do well at all in Colorado. And just leaving Colorado last year, his numbers went right back to who he was in Kansas City. Kansas City has a gigantic outfield, just like San Francisco. So he should be fine. He should be the same old Jake McGee. I think it's a very smart move that they made there. And Logan Webb absolutely killed it in spring training. So maybe he carries that over and he ends up being, their breakout pitcher this year. They did bring in Alex Wood, another lefty, kind of interesting guy. He's kind of consistent, but he's had issues with platoon splits in the past because of his arm angle. I don't know. He seems like kind of more of a 3-starter. And that's it. That's basically all that they have to work with regards to relievers. I mean, Whistler's okay, I guess. Um, Reyes Maranta is okay if he has a good year, doesn't start missing the strike zone. Jose Alvarez, he's okay, but again, he has to hit the strike zone. So that's part of the reason why I'm not super big on the Giants. They're pitching. Now to get on the side of why I am big on the Giants, why I do like the Giants. That's the reason why I think that they're here. But if they had changed their pitching staff, I think that they could go a lot farther because they have Buster Posey, who's now back. They have Joey Bart, who's going to be ready at some point in time to join him just in case they need extra coverage. Or maybe they move Joey Bart to first base and Brandon Belt gets to move to the outfield. They have Brandon Belt, who went off last year, so he still can clearly hit. They have Brandon Crawford, who brought back a little bit of his old performance last year, and I think he should hit in a platoon. Thankfully, he kind of is in a platoon right now, so he should hit again. Donovan Solano, with the type of playing time that they're giving him and the type of usage that they're giving him, he should hit to a certain degree. They have him as well. Tommy LaStella is in a platoon with Wilmer Flores, and that to me is the best platoon in all of Major League Baseball. Flores absolutely toasts lefties, and LaStella absolutely toasts righties. And when LaStella is at second base and Flores isn't, in theory, if you want, you can platoon Flores with Crawford, or you could go the route of platooning Solano with Crawford. Either way, if you platoon Solano with Crawford, then Flores can platoon with Belt, at least until Bart is ready. And that's why, if you extrapolate, okay, Posey catcher, all right, then Bart comes up, Bart first, all right. Then if Bart, is only able to hit from one side of pitching, then you platoon him with Flores. But if not, then you can keep Flores platooning with LaStella. And then you have Belt, who's now in the outfield. And then you have Crawford, who's platooning with Solano. And then you have LaStella and Flores, and you have Longoria, who now has lineup protection, which he's needed for a few years now, especially with his foot injury in spring training. Although he looks all the way back from that, it's worth noting. And then you get to the outfield, and they have Yastrzemski, who can hit. Slater, I think the league is probably going to adapt to him this year. But if they don't, he's an interesting guy to have out there. At minimum, like if the league adapts to him, he'll probably hit lefties. And I think that the league is going to adapt to Alex Dickerson. At minimum, like if he does anything, he'll be able to hit righties to an okay degree. So in theory, you can platoon Slater and Dickerson. And if Slater really doesn't do anything at all, righties or lefties, you can promote Jalen Davis from the minor leagues and platoon him with Alex Dickerson. And then, of course, like I said, you can move Belt out there. So that's Yastrzemski, that's that platoon, and it's Belt. So this is a team that they have an underrated offense in how the league views them. And this is a team that, like they always do, and if you're a Giant fan, you know this, or if you're really an NL West fan, you know this, they always win more games than people project them to win, which is why this was a more of a difficult decision for me between them and the next team. But I had to go with the Giants in this spot just because of how faulty their pitching is. Even if their offense does score enough runs so that they win more games than the next, the pitching's not going to hold up enough for them to win enough games, period, to be a top three in that division. That being said, if you're a Giant fan, all you need is pitching. If you are able to go out there, right? Say Logan Webb develops, right? And let's say that Wood comes back from his injury. He's a number 3 starter. And let's say that Aaron Sanchez, he hasn't been signed in a few years, but he's figured everything out. Boom, there's another guy. And Gaussman develops a third pitch. Boom. And Johnny Cueto has like a rebound year. Boom. Then you have pitching. But that is all way too questionable to have happen. Like those are all, each of those to have happen. Like we're talking about likelihood that Johnny Cueto can turn it back specifically this year, to be super effective. I'd say it's 50-50. Okay. You could do it, or he could just be the same guy. And you know what? I'm not even going to say that. I'll say 40-60. He's going to either be this 60, or he has 40% of turning it back for a year to be maybe a 3.8 ERA, 3.9 ERA. So that's one of the five. Gaussman. Okay, so he'd have to develop a new pitch in the offseason. So he has 3 pitches, right? The chances that he's done that enough to be effective, I'd say about 50-50. That's another 50-50. But that's one that I'm not going to change on. Like the other one changed to 60-40. This is a 50-50. He knows that he has to add a third pitch. It's just really hard to add a big league caliber third pitch. So that's, another one where it's extraordinarily iffy that he's going to give you what you want. Aaron Sanchez, he hasn't been in the league for years. So the chance that he's, figured it out, it's like 80-20. 20 that he's figured it out, maybe 10 that he's figured it out, maybe 15, somewhere in between, right? And then 80-75, you get the idea, right? It's, and then Logan Webb and Alex Wood. The chance that Alex Wood is who he is, I think 80%, not maybe 70% chance that he is the guy that he's been. I mean, him having his lefty righty issues does scare me a little bit. That's why I don't put him higher than that. But I think about 75% chance, maybe 80% chance that Alex Wood is who he used to be. So that's about a 3-starter, maybe a 4-starter because of innings. It's complicated. I'd lean 3-starter. Okay. So Alex Wood is a 3-starter. And let's say that Logan Webb, he does emerge. He takes what he was doing in spring training and his prospect track record and his, I believe college track record. And he takes it and he brings it and he becomes your ace. Okay. So good for you. You have an ace, you have a number 3, and then you have a 4 and a couple of 5s. That's not going to do it. That's not going to make it past 4th place. And that's even looking at things optimistically, and realistically, that being said, if they moved some of these guys to the bullpen, if they moved Alex Wood to the bullpen, if they moved Aaron Sanchez to the bullpen, if they moved Johnny Cueto to the bullpen, if they moved Kevin Gaussman to the bullpen, they would have one of the best bullpens by far in the major leagues. And if they would go out there, if they could go out there and they could get 4 starters to put behind Logan Webb, now you're looking at a team that can really make some noise of sorts. But those are just things that I would do to kind of improve things. It's an offense first team. And I don't know, you finally have a closer, so that's cool. You have some interesting middle inning guys. You have, the ace of the future in Webb. You still have the guys from your championship squad, Belt, Posey, Crawford. You have the best platoon in baseball, in my opinion, in La Stella and Flores. You have top prospect Bart in there. You have Yastrzemski, who's, was raised by Carl Yastrzemski. Most people were like, oh, no, he's the grandson. Yes, he is, but he was raised by Carl. So you have, him in there. I don't know if it was directly raised, but it was the majority of his childhood was spent with Carl. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to use the wrong words here. You know what I mean? Allegedly. Okay. But yeah, they have some good platoons. Jalen Davis is a really interesting bat. He should at minimum be a platoon bat. Maybe actually be an everyday player. Kind of surprise some people. He's very strong. And that when you're a patient hitter and you have a decent swing, you're very strong. Maybe you turn into more than a platoon bat. That can happen. I think that it's the absolute wrong ballpark for Evan Longoria. I think that if you put Evan Longoria back in the American League and you gave him lineup protection in a ballpark that favors him, and you get him off his feet with the DH a little bit more often because he had plantar fasciitis in spring training, I think he probably does a little bit better. But they know that Longoria is going to hit in big moments, and they know that Longoria is going to be consistent defensively, and they know that third base is a difficult position to fill with an elite player. And in big games, that's what he is for you, and especially on the road, that's what he is for you. And now they have lineup protection for him. So, given that his baseball savant numbers were really showing for the third year in a row a massive increase in regards to performance statistics and surrounding performance statistics, especially with regards to his last year's his XBA and his XSLG. Both of those expected batting average, expected slugging were fantastic. They were old Longoria numbers last year. So, and then some people are bigger on Solano, some people are smaller on Solano. I love his swing. I love his athleticism. I have questions about how he's contributed. I think that he would work better with like possibly a different team. I'm worried about his performance moving forward. But perhaps, he's in the perfect, ballpark for it. I don't think he's with the perfect lineup for it. I think that, he's with a lineup that's probably going to bat him in the wrong area of the lineup, top, bottom, Um, that's why I say wrong team, and also different lineup protection. If you had a lot more, you could probably do some more. And if you had a ballpark that worked in his favor for the pull side. But the other thing I think about is he hits enough balls specifically to the opposite field as well, where he sprays it really. It's in infield, outfield, where being in San Francisco might be advantageous in terms of in-play power. So that's where I'm but he needs more lineup protection either way. And yeah, definitely more lineup protection. But I do like his swing mechanics. Like I really like hitters who can get into their legs with their swing, because that means they can have a fundamentally sound swing and not alter it to get to lower pitches. I think that's beautiful if you can do that. It also means that you can kind of open up with your front hip properly, because you can't really sink into pitches well if you're not opened up with your front hip. So it just means mechanically things are kind of working. It could either well or too well, too much movement. You know what I mean? So that's always a good place to operate from. So, and yeah, I think that if we're talking about the minor leagues for San Francisco, there's a lot to look forward to, and this is the other side of the coin, which is they have, if we're talking about a guy who's right up there with Dominguez and Rodriguez as far as top, really young prospects. It's Marco Luciano. He's a guy who he's like, I think 16, 17 years old right now, and he already has like basically the same swing mechanics as Justin Upton. Shortstop right now, doubt he stays with it. Long term, he's either going to move third base or straight to left field. But this is a guy who can, like, he could be an Upton. He could be a guy who could be in the big leagues at 19, 20 years old. And with that kind of swing, if he puts on enough muscle over the next couple of years, like I said, he's like 17 years old, 16 years old, something like that. And then they have this guy, he's a corner outfielder. Ramos, that's right. Yeah. Ramos is, at worst, Ramos will be Randall Grichuk. But at best, Ramos could be a version of Ramon Laureano. And I don't even think we've seen the best of Ramon Laureano yet. But we're looking at a guy who could probably hit about 20 to 25 home runs, maybe a little bit more, maybe like 26. That's Ramos. But also because of his type of swing, he's also going to have elevated success on balls in play. So maybe he'll bat like 320 on balls in play. With his strikeout rate, he's probably batting 285 batting average, 40 doubles, 15 to 25 stolen bases. pretty darn good player, pretty darn good corner outfielder. So they do have some guys in their system that are very underrated. Um, and I personally think that this is a team that we got to give a couple of years to so that they can figure out their pitching situation. But if they figure out their pitching situation in a season or even during this season, I doubt it. Then with the offense that they have, I mean they could really actually make noise. If you're a Giants fan, don't expect that. Enjoy the offense and look forward to the fact that half your roster is basically guys that are going to be pieces that are part of the next championship team, and half your roster is basically pieces that were part of the old championship team. So there's a kind of cross going on here, a passing of the torch, if you will, of, from the guys who won championships to the guys who are the pieces to build around for the future. Um, it's not super exciting, but it's humbling. And if you're a Giants fan, I think that that resonates to a certain degree because you guys won 3 World Series in 5 years. You might be the last dynasty to exist, given the way that baseball is these days. And you don't really win a lot of a team will win a championship and then they'll fall out of it for a few years. So 3 and 5 years might be the closest that anyone can get to like multiple championships in a row. So yeah, you got the very tail end of those old guys. And then you got, guys like Joey Bart coming in. You got guys like Yastrzemski. You got guys like Logan Webb. I don't know. I would kind of just watch this season in appreciation, if that makes sense. And I know that in the past few seasons, you've been like, oh, well, we've been watching the last few years in appreciation. I'm like, yeah, because they haven't really made big moves to kind of expedite this process. It's kind of been what the Phillies did when the Phillies won in 2008 and then they lost in 2009. And instead of, completely rebuilding their team, they just loaded up on pitching and they kept the same offense together. The Giants, they didn't do that. So they got, a bunch of fairly unsuccessful seasons in a row, but it did get them some pretty decent prospects. So that's the other side of that. I don't know. If I'm a Giants fan, appreciate the guys that you got when they are traded. Either go to the ballpark or watch the game to see these young guys, but don't really expect to be in contention super soon unless your team makes a whole bunch of moves for pitching. So that's about all I have to say on the Giants. It's a fairly tame organization. As assessments go, it's more humbling than anything else. But I do got to give tons of credit. I mean, they won 3 in 5 years. People are still talking about that. I mean, in baseball, during a time where people are trying to not talk about the Houston Astros scandal, which happened not that long
goodness.
ago.
I was
Okay.
so happy. I
Trying
thought
to
we made
sweep
it
it.
through. I was like, oh, I can't wait to the end.
So no, but dude, after people are trying to sweep this thing with the Astros under the rug, I'm not letting them. No, but after people are doing
You're not letting them.
After people are doing it though, it's kind of interesting that people are still talking about the 3 and 5 years from 2010, 2012, 2014. That was the end of it. The last championship was 2014. We're in 2021 and people are still talking about that. Wow, look at those teams. Like, that's a dynasty. That's why I say it. That's a dynasty. Like we can talk about like, oh, remember the Phillies teams and remember the Royals teams, because that's close. One World Series, could have won it because they had appearances in the World Series back to back, right? But it was only one championship. This is 3 in 5. There's no dodging that type of greatness. There's no dodging that Crawford, Posey, Belt were getting it done. Madison Bumgarner, Tim Lincecum back then, Matt Cain, Brian Wilson with the, I love that guy. He was nuts. I love it. Allegedly. But no, I love that guy. Really, he was one of my favorite pitchers. Even honestly, like I wish he was still pitching. I want him on my team. It's kind of like Sergio Romo. Even when Sergio Romo stops pitching, it's like no, he's so entertaining. Keep pitching. Honestly, I think if you move Johnny Cueto to the bullpen or you move Felix Hernandez to the bullpen, you get more of those, fist pumps and all of that kind of things because then they're being successful again. When they're successful, those guys, those are competitors. You know what I mean? So, but I don't think that the Giants are going to move all those guys to the bullpen and then add a whole bunch of starters. It's a little bit too much. So, especially this late. I mean, the season started. If you were going to do it during the off season, but they didn't do it. So, and that's all. That's all, folks.
That's all. That's it.
Looney Tunes over here.
Looney Tunes over here. Seriously. So don't forget, always check the description of our podcast episodes. You're going to find the newsletter, which is popping every week. You're going to find the YouTube channel, which is where you want to be for the live streams. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button on everything. The YouTube, the podcast, and you'll be hearing James's voice next time, which is later this week.
All right. See you then.